All right, so let's go ahead and go. All right, so it's 1 o'clock, Tuesday, August 29th here, and I'm meteorologist Wright Dobbs with the U.S. National Weather Service here in Tallahassee. So when everyone's phone in Leon County went off today because of the hurricane warning, that was from us. And basically, that's what the big change is for at least this advisory. There has been a slight westward shift in the track as of the 11 a.m. advisory. Now, it wasn't a very large shift, but it was enough. And when we've been looking at some of the model guidance, that it has necessitated at least a change in hurricane warnings to add Leon County and inland Wakulla County with this update. So, what is Hurricane Idalia doing right now? Well, Hurricane Idalia is a hurricane right now with maximum sustained winds of around 85 miles per hour. And the thing we want to note is that it's continuing to strengthen. The big things that we want to pass on is that storm surge warning is still in effect from Indian Pass eastwards through much of the Appalachian Bay and down the Nature Coast, and even down as far south as Tampa Bay and other areas just south of there. So, like over the last 24 hours, we continue to see a gradual westward shift overnight, but it hasn't been a very large shift. So, we want to make sure that folks are still keeping an eye on how things are going to evolve because we could still see a few westward shifts depending on what the models do over the next 12 to 24 hours before Idalia gets close. So Idalia will increase its forward speed today. And the thing to note is that we are now less than 24 hours from landfall. So you can see here with this update, you see Idalia is forecast to be rapidly intensified today and then be a major hurricane by tonight with landfall likely sometime on Wednesday morning. So it's just offshore the southeast parts of the Big Bend at 8 a.m. Central Time Wednesday, or sorry, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday. So here's the big message that we want to pass along. So the big thing with Hurricane Idalia is that it is likely to be an unprecedented event for much of the Appalachian Bay. So the thing is, when we looked at all the recorded hurricanes, at least in recorded history, we found that there hasn't been a single occurrence between the Dixie-Levy County line and all the way down to Gulf County. There hasn't been a single occurrence of a Category 3 major hurricane entering this red area in Appalachian Bay. And the thing to note is that this is when we look at this storm, there's going to be a lot of things that people haven't seen before, especially for residents along the Big Bend and maybe in some inland parts of the Big Bend. So we want to make sure folks are being careful to not compare this to other storms because Idalia is going to be a different storm that many folks have seen. And there have been hurricanes and systems that have been close, but those were either in the 1800s or maybe even with Hurricane Easy in 1950. It's been a long time, and things have development has gone as there's been a lot of development along the Appalachian Bay. So again, we want to make sure folks aren't comparing storms because this one's going to be different. I think a lot of folks might compare the surge potential with this event to something like the superstorm in 93. And what we're looking at with the current forecast values is we could see the potential for storm surge to be higher than what a lot of folks might remember with the superstorm in 93. So again, make sure that you are finishing your preparations today. That is the most important message. And basically, with this being an unprecedented event for much of the Appalachian Bay, want to make sure you're not comparing to last storms, and you're going to be looking at the individual impacts that we're advertising for folks along the Appalachian Bay and parts of the Big Bend. So here's the current the hurricane and tropical storm warnings across the area, and also the storm surge warning that's in purple along the Appalachian Bay. So looking here with this advisory, we didn't make a whole lot of changes. The big changes were the westward expansion of hurricane warnings into inland Wakulla County and all of Leon County and Tallahassee. So the one other expansion was adding tropical storm warnings a little bit more to the northwest and other parts of south central Georgia. So the storm surge warning is still in effect. And the one thing to note with storm surge is that the values have actually increased a little bit with this advisory. And we're going to get into how much they've increased a little bit later on. So here's the current satellite picture of Hurricane Idalia. It continues to become better organized. You can definitely this looks like a lot different storm than we saw 24 hours ago when it was still struggling, although slowly organizing across the southwest tip of Cuba. So right now, we're definitely starting to see those signs of intensification. And as we go through the next 24 hours up until landfall Wednesday morning, National Hurricane Center and National Weather Service meteorologists are predicting that the storm will likely rapidly strengthen through the next 18 to 24 hours. So right now, this afternoon, And this evening, this is the last chance you have to get things done, or if you are under an evacuation order from your local emergency management officials, tonight is going to be the last chance you have to get out of the way of this storm. So again, please follow the advice of your local officials. And remember, not every, especially for inland areas, not everybody needs to evacuate. Remember, we have to make sure that people are going to be, some folks might be evacuating from the coast. So we need to make sure that they have the ability to ride out the storm as well. So currently, the center of Idalia is about 365 miles southwest of Steinhatchee, Florida. And again, it's likely to rapidly intensify through the rest of the afternoon. So here's the tropical storm force wind probabilities. You can see that it's almost with a near certainty that at least a good portion of all of the southeast Big Bend, and even up into some parts of south central Georgia and western parts of the Big Bend, will see that potential for tropical storm force winds. And these probabilities really haven't changed a whole lot. That's mostly due to the guidance not changing a whole lot. And as we get closer to the event, we start to narrow down those probabilities. So just wanted to note that certainly for areas across the southeast Big Bend, Taylor, Dixie, Lafayette, Madison County, and even up into south central Georgia, it's almost a near certainty that sustained tropical storm force winds will occur. So elsewhere around those areas, kind of into the western parts of the Big Bend and south central Georgia, we've started to see those probabilities go up a little bit, and that was mostly due to the westward shift in the track compared to this point 12 to 24 hours ago. So what do we want you to take from this graphic? Well, this is showing when the tropical storm force winds are most likely to arrive. In other words, that means there's a 50% chance that the winds are going to arrive around this time. So you can see by the time we get to Wednesday at 2 a.m., those tropical storm force winds are going to be just offshore. And then especially as we get into Wednesday, 8 a.m. around daybreak, the event is going to be unfolding right there. And tropical storm force winds will be steadily making their way inland. So what this graphic is telling you is pretty much if you don't have things done by this evening, you could be in a little bit of trouble. So make sure you're getting stuff done today. If you need to wrap up those supply kits, need to make sure you need any batteries or other stuff, anything you need to get yourself through the storm, make sure you have it today and tonight, because that's your last chance. And again, if you're told to evacuate by local officials, please make sure you heed their advice today and not late tonight, or definitely not Wednesday morning. So here's a more zoomed in graphic of the tropical storm force wind probabilities. These have especially in parts like Tallahassee and areas on the western fringe of where we see where Idalia is supposed to move. These probabilities have come up, and that's mostly due to that westward shift that we saw in the 11 a.m. advisory. And we do want folks to note, especially seeing some model guidance still to the west of where the current forecast track is, that there is westward shifts that could occur. We're not saying they will, but you need to be ready if you're in other parts of the Big Bend, say Leon County, Wakulla County, Gadsden, Liberty, other areas. You need to be ready for a possible increase in the wind speed probabilities as we get closer to the event on Wednesday morning. And a big thing I want to point out here is that we need to make sure folks are not focusing on the cone. The cone is only a depiction of where the center of Idalia is going to go. It does not depict at all where impacts will occur. And the graphic right here on the left shows that point excellently. Look at the potential for major hurricane level winds, winds greater than 110 miles an hour, where you have that potential. Look at how those are outside the cone. And the reason for that is the cone is a historical depiction of forecast uncertainty. It does not show the uncertainty with this storm. And it certainly doesn't show where the impacts are going to arrive. So if we look at parts of Leon County and Wakulla County, and especially down into southeast Big Bend, these are the probabilities for hurricane force winds. And these probabilities have increased fairly significantly compared to what we saw 12 to 18 hours ago. So we want folks to remember that, especially where we just recently upgraded the hurricane warning in Leon County and Wakulla County, you guys are not out of the woods at all yet. So make sure you're getting things wrapped up tonight, and make sure you have the supply kits ready to withstand possibly a few days of power outages and other stuff and other similar occurrences like that. And one last point about this graphic on the left. So this is a depiction of what you should be preparing for. It's not necessarily a forecast of what's going to happen, but it's something that you should be prepared for. So you can see, and for using Tallahassee as an example, it says the potential for wind of 74 to 110 miles per hour. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see those sustained winds of 74 to 110 miles an hour, but it does mean that you need to be ready for that because these kind of graphics they include what's called safety margins. So if the storm is bigger than forecast or it moves further west than forecast, then you'll be ready for it. And you can see also similar circumstances, even parts of the nature coast where even though we've seen some westward shifts, they still have to prepare as well for those potential for hurricane force winds because again, these account for uncertainty. So make sure you're not letting your guard down yet. In addition to the wind, the big concern with Idalia is going to be the storm surge. Now, the biggest update with the 11 a.m. advisory is that we've seen these values go up. So from breakpoints between the Osceola River and Yankeetown, storm surge values are now forecast to be around 10 to 15 feet. So folks need to be ready for that. That is as high as a one-story house. So a surge like that is very catastrophic and is exceptionally life-threatening. So we want to make sure that if you're told to evacuate by local officials, you're not taking their orders lightly because they are doing this for your safety, and you especially need to follow those orders, or you risk your own life or your loved ones' lives as well. So currently, storm surge warnings did not change with this advisory. They're currently in effect from Indian Pass eastward through the Appalachee Bay and down into parts of Tampa Bay and even a little bit further south in there. The inundation that we're going to see is we're going to start seeing water levels creep up later this afternoon, but the most significant storm surge flooding is not likely until Wednesday as Idalia's center gets closer to the area. So you only got about 12 hours left before we're starting to become concerned about storm surge across the Appalachee Bay. So again, late tonight is your last chance if you've been told to evacuate to get out. So listen to your local officials. Again, tonight is the last chance. Surge, and we still want to stress this, surge is still very track dependent. So remember, these values are going to be strongest or highest along where the center of Idalia goes and to the east or to the right of its motion. So if Idalia takes a path a little bit more to the west, then we could see those higher end values creep up into parts of northern Appalachee Bay. And that's something we're going to be monitoring very closely over the next 12 hours. And we are in close coordination with the Storm Surge Unit at the National Hurricane Center to make sure we're getting the best information out there for you guys. And then remember, these values are height above normally dry ground. And 10 to 15 feet above dry ground is extremely dangerous. So what kind of damage can we see with storm surge values like this? Well, widespread deep inundation and the thing is the storm surge will also have wave action on top of that. So keep in mind these levels only talk about the water level. It doesn't include the wave action on top. So imagine if you're getting 10 to 15 feet of storm surge and you're getting a couple feet of waves on top of that. It's going to cause a lot of damage. And that with that said, structural damage to buildings could or is likely to happen in some areas along these higher values are forecast to occur. And we can't rule out some buildings possibly washing away in storm surge like this. So when we see these values creep up, you're going to see your escape routes washed away or vanish. So if you're stuck somewhere and the flooding is all around you, you're not going to be able to get out, and you're certainly not going to be able to be rescued when with the high winds, the storm surge, you're going to be in big trouble. So if you're in these storm surge zones and you're ordered to evacuate, again, do not take their advice lightly. It's recommended that you evacuate if told to do so. Moving on from the surge and the wind, we'll go quickly to talk about the rainfall impacts. Thankfully, the quick motion of Idalia is at least going to limit the scope of potential flooding, but we still want to make sure that folks, especially across the Big Bend and to South Central Georgia, and especially the Southeast Big Bend, are still prepared for that potential for moderate to maybe in isolated areas major flooding. And mostly that's going to be due to the possibility of 6 to 8 inches of rain, with some isolated areas possibly getting up to 10 inches or maybe an isolated foot. And most of that is due to occur because it's going to happen in a very short duration. So if we had these amounts over a lot longer time, we might be able to withstand these amounts, but these amounts are going to occur relatively quickly in only maybe a 12-hour span in some areas, especially along the Southeast Big Bend. So again, those kind of values can lead to flooding. And again, that's going to be maximized in the Southeast Big Bend and across South Central Georgia. So make sure if you're keeping an eye on that, and we show that here with some of the graphic and some of this, what we call the hurricane threats and impacts graphic, is that In those red areas, flooding may prompt evacuations and it could prompt rescues. But something to keep in mind with about rescues is that many first responders will not go out at all if winds are above 40 to 45 miles an hour. So if you're in a spot that maybe is prone to flooding, be careful because you might not have the ability to be rescued because first responders do not typically go out when the tropical storm force winds arrive. So we want to make sure know your risk. If you've gotten flooding before from rainfall amounts like this, maybe you should consider going to an area that's not as flood prone. Some of these floodwaters could enter structures or it could weaken foundations. And several places, especially underpasses, low-lying spots, and poor drainage areas, could see rapid rises in water. So here's the current summary of the hazards in effect that don't include tropical storm watches and warnings. So, with that concern for the flooding rain, all these areas here in green are where we have flood watches in effect. Basically, just all the accumulation of rainfall could create issues with flooding in these green areas, especially across the southeast Big Bend and south central Georgia. Elsewhere, a little bit further to the west in Panama City, and then along the coast of Walton County, while we don't have tropical storm watches as far west as there, we do want to take note that the surf is going to be rising pretty significantly as Idalia rapidly intensifies, and it's going to throw a large swell to the Gulf Coast. So what that's going to do is we're going to see very high wave heights along the rest of the coast. So basically, if you're in those areas, do not think about getting in the water because not only are the surf heights deadly, but there's also going to be life-threatening rip currents. And then further to the west, if you're a mariner and want to go out on your small little boat, don't do it. Just don't do it this week because we're going to see very large seas across our western waters where just offshore Panama City and offshore Walton County. So one question people might ask is why are we not seeing the high surf warning go to maybe southeast parts of the Big Bend? Well, due to the shallow nature of the Appalachia Bay, it's hard to drive very high waves, at least that meet the criteria of our high surf warning. But the problem is we're still going to be dealing with storm surge in those areas. And there will be a couple of feet of wave action on top of those waves. So just don't get in the water. You might remember to leave if you're told to do so. Remember to leave and get away from the coast if you're told to evacuate by local officials. And the last threat we'll talk about real quick is the tornado threat. So with the westward shift of Idalia, we have seen at least the tornado potential move a little bit west. But again, this threat for tornado potential is generally going to be mostly east of the area, but still in these outer rain bands that begin to move through late this evening, and especially on Wednesday morning, are going to produce that potential for tornadoes. So maybe later this evening, if you're still wrapping up your preparedness plans, you still are going to want to keep an eye on the radar. Make sure wireless emergency alerts are enabled on your phone so you can get a tornado warning on your phone if we issue it. And some of these impacts that we can see from tornadoes is, destruction of trees. Maybe some areas could experience a little bit of tornado damage if we get a strong enough tornado move through in one of these outer rain bands. And again, meteorologists here at the National Weather Service in Tallahassee will be continually monitoring the radar. But keep in mind that with tropical tornadoes, the lead time can typically be small because they spin up very quick and they don't last for a long time. So if you get a warning on your phone, a tornado warning on your phone, you want to take shelter right away because you might not have much time to take shelter from the tornado. So that's all we have for this update. I'm going to go ahead and go through some of these key points and takeaways, and I'm also going to have our warning coordination meteorologist, Mark Wool. He's going to say a few words as we get towards the latter stages of preparedness and as we get to the eventuality of Hurricane Idalia knocking on our doorstep in about 12 to 15 hours. So the key changes from yesterday. Hurricane warnings are now in effect for Leon County and inland Wakulla County. This is due to the slight westward shift in the storm over the last 12 to 18 hours. Tropical storm warnings have been extended northwestward into parts of Georgia. The landfall intensity is a little bit stronger now. It's been increased to 125 mile per hour winds, which is a strong Category 3 storm. The track has also, again, shifted west slightly from the previous advisory, and we still want to remind folks, look out for potential shifts in the track. And again, even if you're on the east side of the storm, just because it's been shifting west doesn't mean you can let your guard down yet, because just like there's still that possibility of it shifting west, hurricanes are still unpredictable at times, and we want to make sure folks on the eastern side of the storm who might have thought, oh, I'm safe because it's gone west. No, do not let your guard down yet. If the hurricane threats and impacts are saying prepare for the possibility of hurricane force winds, make sure you're preparing for those, regardless of the shifts in the track. So, what do we know? Based on the latest forecast, impacts will occur along our coastal areas, possibly as late as this evening with the outer rain bands, but they're most likely going to be in the late hours tonight and early on Wednesday morning, with landfall expected to occur sometime Wednesday morning, somewhere within the hurricane warning area along the coast of the Big Bend. Idalia is quickly becoming better organized, and the environment ahead of the storm is conducive for strengthening. And it's expected that Idalia will be a major hurricane at landfall with winds possibly in excess of 125 miles per hour. And a catastrophic and life-threatening storm surge is likely across the Appalachian Bay. And the last thing is some of the things we don't know is the intensity forecast is still somewhat uncertain, and it's still possible Idalia could strengthen more than forecast. So consider maybe ask yourself if you're maybe prepared, especially along the immediate coastal areas, consider the low possibility of a Category 4 hurricane. But again, we're not saying that's going to happen, but we want to make sure folks are ready for that. That's the thing about hurricanes. We don't always know what they're going to do, but we can control how prepared we are for those upper end outcomes. So I'm going to go ahead and give the mic to warning coordination meteorologist Mark Wohl. He's going to say a few words, and then we're going to go ahead and conclude the broadcast and look through some of your questions. So I'll hand it over to Mark Wohl.
All right, thank you very much, Wright. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to hop on here at the end to underscore some of the main takeaways we want you to have here. You're rapidly running out of time to get prepared. We really seriously want folks to be completely prepared and either have evacuated to their safe place or be ready to shelter in place with all the supplies you need to get through an extended power outage, preferably by this evening, but certainly by bedtime. Waiting till tomorrow morning is just not going to be an option. Kind of similar to what happened to Hurricane Michael. You know, we needed everybody to get prepared. And another similarity to Michael is, you know, there's never been a hurricane of this strength in the Appalachian Bay. You know, this is an unprecedented event. If you have family or relatives that are hesitant to evacuate down there in the evacuation zones, you need to use words like this. The storm surge is unsurvivable. People that stay there are seriously, you know, playing, you know, games with their lives, and those are their families. So if you or your families are in an evacuation zone, you need to get out now while you still can. If you're planning to hunker down, make sure you got everything you need there. You know, here in Tallahassee, we don't get a lot of hurricanes, and but we have had some in recent memory. Hermine in 2016 comes to mind. Anybody that lived here at the time knows that that was a Category 1 hurricane that passed east of the area, right? And know how much of the city lost power there, and in some cases for a week or more. Michael, much further to the west, kind of had similar effects here. So unlike Hermine, this is a much stronger hurricane passing not too far to the east of Tallahassee. So you can imagine the likelihood of having many trees down along with power lines is very high. So you're going to need to be prepared for at least a couple of days, if not a week, without power, and find it very, very difficult to get around. And even once the wind subsides, it is not safe for you to be out and about. We need to let the city utility crews get out there, clear the trees, you know, remove those potentially still live power lines, and let the first responders get to the people that need them. So just because you can get out and drive around, perhaps in your area, it's maybe not the best idea to do so in the immediate aftermath. So just heed the advice you get from your emergency management and your local government officials. Stay safe. Take the time now while you have it to be prepared. And let's all get through this together and come out the other side. So with that, I will hand things back to Wright.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. So again, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We're running a little long here, so we're not going to be able to take questions. You know, we're still very busy handling stuff with the storm and all the forecasts for the storm. So if you guys have some questions, go ahead and put them in the comments, and at least we'll attempt to get through some of them this afternoon and evening. So thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and please be safe as Hurricane Idalia moves closer and closer to the area. Again, in the next 12 to 15 hours, that's about all you got left because by the time Wednesday morning comes around, Idalia is going to be knocking on our door. So, again, make sure you get stuff wrapped up tonight. And thanks for tuning in, everybody. Stay safe.